Fantastic. Happy Wednesday. Hello and welcome to a webinar session on 4 steps to creating impactful IR presentations. My name is 𝗗𝗪𝗪𝗡𝗏. I'm the founder and CEO at OUTKREATE. We are a Washington, D.C. based design agency, and we specialize in presentations. First of all, wanted to thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. This is geared towards helping public company IROs make compelling presentations for your audience, which is analysts and institutional investor audience. I'm hoping you'll find value in what we will be sharing today. And I sincerely hope you can apply some of these learnings in your presentations going forward. I want to dive in. We will have some questions later. I will ask for a little bit of engagement, but otherwise we'll keep diving in, focus on the content, want to make sure we give you value and make it worth your time. Great. So over the last 2.5 years, we've seen a lot of interest from investor relations teams. So we've learned a lot working with public company IROs, and that's what we will be sharing with you today. We have been fortunate. We've worked on a few earnings decks, investor overview decks, investor conference presentations, and several investor days as well. We are doing 4 investor days in 2022 this year already, and there have been a lot of great learnings. So everything learned working with real world IROs, that's what we're going to share with you today. If you can see at the bottom, these are some of the companies where we work with their IROs. You will see we haven't really picked a sector. We are sector agnostic. We are realizing like there's a lot of good learnings, especially in what we do, that can be applied from one sector to the other or one company to the other. We have worked quite a bit with industrials, B2B companies, some consumer goods companies, technology companies as well. So hopefully some of the content you can relate to, or it should still apply to your industry nevertheless. A little bit about myself. My name is 𝗗𝗪𝗪𝗡𝗏 again. I started OUTKREATE in 2015. Like most of you here, I am sort of more left brain focused, more analytical. In my company, my role is to focus on content and storytelling needs of our clients. I do speak to a lot of IROs, and that's how we have sort of learned a lot. Before starting my company, I used to work at the 𝗗𝗪𝗪𝗡𝗏 company, where I worked in corporate strategy, which is where I really fell in love with presentation design. I also used to work with our investor relations teams at 𝗗𝗪𝗪𝗡𝗏, helping with some major conference presentations as well. And then I'm an engineer, so I've been lucky. I've worked in supply chain, I've worked in sales. I love business. I love understanding other people's business, and I've been very lucky to turn this passion and love for business into work. So, but like I mentioned, I'm the more left brain side of things. Luckily, we have a team that is more right brain, can think more design, can think more visualization, can think more impactful, slides. So we have a fantastic team, and that's how together we do the magic. Great. I want to dive right in here. You guys are all here for a reason. So here's a question. I want to make sure we are present here. Love to get your inputs here. So if you don't mind typing into the chat, or feel free to come on mic as well. What is the hardest thing about investor presentations? I want to learn from you. Like, what are some of your challenges as you work on your investor presentations?
I would say it's striking the balance with the technical detail and the overview, between the technical detail and the overview for the investor.
Okay. Yeah. So some of the details are important. At the same time, you want to keep things high level. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to, geek out on an investor and bore them with detail and then miss the bigger picture, try to explain, the real kind of compelling reason to invest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A part of it also sounds like, how do you sort of laymanize it? Not laymanize it really, but laymanize it for a broader audience. Yeah. Love it. Jason says, making the words brief. That's a good one. Okay. Making the words brief. That's something we can definitely focus on a little bit today. M. Devlin, I don't know your first name, but you're saying getting good graphics from the design team. Yep. Yeah, I think substance is super important, right? Your content, your story, your structure is foundational. But then you want, beyond that, right? You want the sizzle and the steak to be able to present effectively, especially in today's day and age where, everybody is sort of, it's hard to get people's attention. So how can you incorporate good graphics? Makes sense. Especially I feel like with investor relations too, it's not the same as designing for sales and marketing audience. It's a little bit different, especially because you're trying to connect with analysts. Visuals and consolidating details. Love it. Karen says, Marco says, creating modern design, refreshing in a regular cadence annually. Yeah, that makes sense. Annually, every 1 or 2 years, I think, yeah, you could sort of make sure your presentation is modern, staying up with the times, especially post-pandemic, right? More and more virtual meetings are happening. So are your presentations optimized for virtual as well? So visualizing, messaging. So I like some of these, you guys are on to a lot of visualization stuff, which is what we will cover a good bit today. Finding right photos, having a standalone slide deck that is still clean and concise. I'm not going to share some resources for pictures, but that is something I can definitely email you afterwards too. There are some good free resources, complimentary resources to get some good visual content. And then Aaron says, getting executive consensus without ruining design or story structure. I love this. Yeah, this is something I hear very commonly, right? It's very hard at times. You guys work with very senior leaders, very often type A, very clear about what they want. And it's a balancing act, right? To get your story right while getting your design right. Yeah, love it. So thank you all. This is some really good feedback. We will focus on visualization. We will focus on story. Somebody mentioned about story structure. And then we will focus on how can you make your slides easy to digest? Like, can your analyst, can your audience get it in 5 seconds, 10 seconds? We will talk about that. Love it, team. Thank you all. Yeah, appreciate the engagement here. Cool. I'll keep moving. So you guys mentioned some of the problems. I agree with most of them. These are some of the problems that we have noticed working with IROs. Let's dive in, right? Number one thing I see is, are we considering our audience consistently? So by this, what we mean is, right, let's assume your primary audience is analysts, right? And your analysts are bombarded, right? You are competing for their attention with other companies as well. And a lot of times I see, right, we're not keeping in mind how analysts work, right? How they like to see details when designing presentations. And we'll dive into it in the next few minutes. Somebody said this, right? High level message, is it clear, right? So I do see this as an opportunity. When I talk to IROs, I'm asking for the elevator pitch for your company, right? You guys do a really good job giving me the 30-second, 60-second pitch, but does that translate into an investor overview presentation? Quarterly earnings, you might give me a strong 30-second pitch, right? What happened? Does it translate into the presentation? A lot of times that's not happening, and we'll share some ideas with you, some structures, frameworks with you to address this. This is another one kind of related, right? Structure could be missing. So your main message, but do you have a structure that's logical, structure that's easy to remember for your audience? Sometimes that is missing. Sometimes it's just a factor of us getting too close with our presentations and not able to kind of look at it, from an outside in perspective. We'll cover this too. And then you guys mentioned a lot, right? How can you make your slides visually interesting? I do feel like a lot of times, the presentations are buried in a sea of sameness, right? Like it's not enticing the audience. It's not really compelling the audience to, check you out, right? So definitely that's a problem, but also an opportunity. And then these are things I've seen in presentations, like story or main message or audience, or visually, not up to the mark. But I also understand, right? You guys live in an environment that makes it harder to prioritize presentations, right? So this is what I heard, right? In-house design teams either don't give you the love because they're focused on higher priority things, or sometimes they give you the love, but they don't understand IR as well. They think very much product and solutions versus your audience is not your customers. Your audience is more is analysts, investors, a different audience. You are selling the value proposition of your company versus if your designers are in the commercial teams, right? They are selling the product or solutions of the company. So I do understand that makes it a little challenging. I also see there's a lot of inertia with past presentations. I often hear things like, my predecessor did this, or my leadership likes to see things in a certain way. So a lot of times I see we go back to old presentations and we just update things versus having a first principles approach, right? Like, oh, what am I doing here? Why am I presenting in the first place? What's the main message? Can I think of a structure, right, that resonates well with my audience? So I do see inertia playing a role. The other thing is you guys have blind spots too, right? I have blind spots myself too, right? I can't see things, from inside the jar, right? I can't read the label from inside the jar. Same thing with IROs. What I've felt is IROs are very business savvy, financially savvy, but presentation, story structure, not necessarily the biggest strength, And then I hear this a lot. Most of you are a one-person team or a very small team. And so presentation is the last thing, right, in terms of your priorities. Let me take a look at the chat. Any other comments, etc. So yeah, these are some of the challenges. I don't know if you agree with some of these. If you relate to some of these, do chime in. I think it'll be helpful for others to understand as well. But yeah, these are some of the problems that you guys have. This is the environment you guys operate under. But here's the opportunity, okay? That's what we want to share with you today. So the opportunity is, basically through the four-step framework that we're going to share with you today. Like I mentioned, right, with IROs, I feel like you guys are very strong in terms of, your business, your audience. You guys have strong ideas about what you want to convey. And the opportunity is, how can we convey those ideas so you are able to influence your audience? And here are the four things, should I say 4 steps, that could help us tap that opportunity. So the number one is, we want to enable you. We want to help you speak to your audience. Number 2 is, how can you craft your story so people remember your message, people remember what you're trying to say. Number 3 is, how can you build clear slides, right? So if you can build clear slides, people can get your slides in 6 seconds, 10 seconds. People can digest your information more easily and you get your message across. And finally, you guys spoke a lot about it, right? Enhancing visual design. So these are like 4 steps, but honestly, these are 4 opportunities. You can think of it in a step-by-step fashion to elevate your presentation. All right, so I'm going to dive into these 4 steps. And I just wanted to make it clear, like in terms of what we will cover, what we will not cover, So here's what we will show you in the next 45 minutes or so. We will spend time on, improving content, structure, and design for IR presentations. The goal is, how can we make them clearer? How can we make them more compelling? Okay, this is what we do. We are a design agency. This is what we do. We just happen to have some investor relations experience. What we will not be sharing with you is things like, what is the right positioning for your company? What's the strategy or messaging from an IR perspective? If you're thinking about your investor day, what does that agenda look like? How to kind of understand the perception study, right? You might have done with analysts. That's not our expertise. That's not something we will be focusing on, in the next few minutes. So those are your expertise, being IROs, and there are strategic advisory IR consulting firms who will do a better job at advising you on that. Yeah, so we'll just focus on, your message, your strategy. How can you make it clear and compelling by applying sound presentation design principles? Okay. So I'll go through step by step through each of the steps. Some of you may be taking a lot of notes, and that's great. In case you want to pay attention to this presentation, and then if you want me to take a look at your presentation afterwards, that is also an option. I love to speak to IROs. That's a complimentary service we provide. At the end, we will share some details in terms of how to book time with us. And I can get on a Zoom call with you, walk you through one or two of your presentations, and we can give you some very clear, actionable advice that you can apply on your own. So feel free to take notes, but if you don't want to take notes, feel free to tap us as a resource to look at your presentations. All right, let's dive in. Step number one is speaking to your audience. So let's get started here. I want to share with you 3 key principles to keep in mind so that you're truly speaking to your analyst audience. So I've thought of the analyst audience as like a common denominator for you. Let's design slides that works well with them. Now, for each of these 3 principles, right, I don't want to merely tell you the principle, right? We want to understand the why behind each, okay? So principle number 1, right, before I get in there, right, let's understand the why. So here's how analysts work and what does it mean to you, right? That's the approach we'll be taking, right? So again, it applies to analysts, but it will apply to a lot of other audiences as well. When you're presenting to senior leaders, investors, a lot of these principles still apply. So here's one thing we have learned about analysts. We've spoken to a few of them. We've spoken to a few IROs who used to be analysts in the past, right? And the one thing I hear is like, analysts don't want you to beat around the bush, right? Just like us, right? They are impatient, right? They want you to get right to the point. So here's the first principle, and I'll show some examples as well. But here's what you should do. You want to be direct with them, in your presentations. Whether it is an individual slide, right? You want to make sure you're landing the plane. You're very direct, right? Or if it's the presentation itself, right? You want to set expectations up front. Hey, maybe you have a one-on-one call with an analyst. Within the first 5 minutes, right? You're setting expectations. In the next 25 minutes, this is what we are going to do, So it might sound like a very simple principle, but it's a very important one. And let's take a look at some examples as to how you can apply it. So when we say be direct, set expectations up front, right? One way to do that is to start every presentation with the key messages slide up front. This might sound very basic, but I see a lot of presentations where, I'm kept guessing as to where this is going, So if it is your quarterly earnings presentation, right, your first slide should always be the key highlights of your quarterly earnings presentation. If somebody just stops at this slide and doesn't see the rest of your presentation, you are still able to get your point across. Sorry if somebody was saying something. Cool. I did check out some of your presentations. I did see like several of you have the highlights up front, and I did notice a couple without the highlights as well. So a very simple principle, but can we get our, key takeaways, key messages up front itself? This is another example from an investor conference presentation. The CEO gets on the stage and says, hey, over the next 35 minutes, these are the 3 things I want you to walk away with, right? So yeah, this is a way to keep your audience on their seat. You're not keeping them guessing, and they're following your presentation throughout. The next principle, again, there are many, many principles, but we are prioritizing the 3 basic ones, which will at least get you a strong foundation, right, with your presentation. So another one that I hear is they are not buying everything you are saying. Everybody is saying, right, 100% carbon neutral by 2030, right? Equal pay, done. Responsible sourcing, done, right? Everybody, if you look at your peers, right, and look at some of the commitments made, they are very, very similar. So analysts, if you are the analyst, right, it's hard for you to buy everything the companies are saying. So what should you do about it, right? A good one, and I learned from one of the IROs itself, is walk the walk, talk the talk. Whenever in your presentations, if at the beginning itself, you're able to say, this is what we told you, this is what we have delivered, that gives you credibility for the rest of your presentation. So I think Investor Day is an example where people do this well, but you could do this more, even in your quarterlies, your overview decks, right? You could say, hey, these are the guidance we have shared before. This is where we are. We are over delivering, or we are achieving. Walk the walk, talk the talk. Very simple, but very, very effective. You want to buy credibility, right? So people believe in everything else you are saying. So share a couple examples. This is from an ESG presentation of a company. This was presented at a Bernstein conference where this company is saying, these are all the commitments we had made before. We're going to make some more today, but before we tell you, everything we have said before, we have already done, so sourcing, done. Environmental impact, whatever commitments we made, done. Human capital, whatever commitments we made, done. So this was like the 3rd or 4th slide in the presentation. Now you have your audience is believing in the rest of your message. This was the very 2nd slide in a big investor conference, right? This is what we told you 4 years ago. This is where we are. Done, done, done. So walk the walk, talk the talk, buy instant credibility from your audiences. And the final one, again, this I heard from one of the analysts who said pre-pandemic, folks would print out decks after decks, and they would like flip through the decks. They would quickly go through the decks. So just like us, right? They don't have time. Plus they see a lot of presentations, right? So what can we do? Well, we want to make sure, since they don't have time, we want to make sure our information is easy to digest. And since they are seeing a lot of similar presentations, can we visually get their attention? Can we visually impress them? Some examples, some principles around these I'll cover in a few more minutes. But that's pretty much step 1, right? How can you make your slides easy to digest, visually impress your audience? Principle number 3. Number 2 was walk the walk, talk the talk. And number 1 was, be direct with your audience, set expectations upfront. I want to dive into step 2, and then we'll take a short sort of engagement question break, and love to hear your feedback, your thoughts. So the second step, right, to elevate your presentation is crafting your story. I think this is the most important step. Sometimes, some other things could be off. Your slides may not be as well designed. Maybe you don't have time, right, to build a professional looking deck. But this is the step, right? We all want to invest proper time in. If you have a story, if you have a strong structure, right, it takes care of a lot of other issues. So this is one I feel like, it's worth investing time and effort in to craft the right structure for your presentation. Again, some of you might be asking the question like, why should I care about crafting, a story? And again, we are not trying to talk about stories in a movie or a TV show or in a book, right? We are just trying to talk about a story structure, right? Especially keeping in mind IR presentations. Why do we need a structure, right? If you have a sound structure, people remember your message, right? If the structure is crafted well, people can retell your message as well, right? So when your presentation has a strong structure, it's easy for your audience to remember. It's easy for them to share with others as well. And that's what you want with your presentations. So let's look at some high-level frameworks that can work. My favorite is this principle called the pyramid principle. This is basically a way to outline your presentations. Again, step 1, step 2, you really don't need to open PowerPoint in order to think about these steps, right? You can do this in a notepad, and actually it's wonderful if you do in a notepad itself, without getting into the slide building mode. A lot of times we either open an old presentation or we open PowerPoint and start cranking out slides. I would say resist the temptation and, think about the story, think about the main message. And sometimes it can be done better on a piece of paper, right? The way the thinking happens, it's better when, you have a pen and a notepad and the touch, that helps you with it. So the pyramid principle, this is a book by folks who worked at McKinsey. I recently realized like even Neary uses this framework when they talk about storytelling and presentations. So what is this? It'll feel a little complicated, but we'll bring this home with some clear examples, right? So according to the pyramid principle, right, you want to start with the main recommendation or the main idea at the top, right? Let's say you're working on your investor overview presentation. You might have 3 or 4 reasons to believe, right, for your audiences, right, to believe in your company. So you could start at that, Another way to think about it is like, if I met you in an elevator and I was like, why should we invest in your company? Whatever your elevator pitch is, that's like your main message, okay? Then from there, you can group those main messages. Here are 3 reasons you should invest in my company. We have amazing brands and strong consumer affinity to brands, or we have IP that nobody else has that gives us a moat, and that's why, we are unique in what we do. Or it could be, other things, whether it's technology, proprietary processes, customer retention, other things, right? But the idea is you start with the main message, then think about grouping your main messages, and then you have supporting data, insights for each of those main messages. So I mentioned to you like 3 or 4 reasons why you should believe in me. That could be the strategy of your company. And then you have supporting data to prove your message. Okay. Over here, it says you logically order your ideas. Yeah, so you have all these ideas, you logically order them. This might look a little complicated, but I think with investor presentations, this can be simple. So let me share examples to bring this home. Let's look at this, right? Let's take a look at an investor relations presentation example. I want to talk about an investor overview deck. Most of you today have or at least we are seeing like a lot of IROs have like a short 10 to 15 slides deck that gives an overview about your company. It focuses more on business and definitely has some financials as well. Now, this structure can also apply if you're presenting at a conference or if you're thinking about Investor Day. This structure can apply in those situations as well, right? So you can think about your main messages, right? What is it you want to convey at a conference, at an Investor Day, in an overview deck? If you are struggling with that, right? A lot of companies, I know, they think like, I need a CEO section and I need a CFO section. That's also another way to think about it. So either you can go bottom up or you can go top down, depending on your situation, how clear you are with the main message. So again, for an overview deck, for a conference deck, right? You could start with the CFO section, because when I've seen a lot of these presentations, right, they're fairly standard, they're fairly simple, right? So the finance section, the CFO section is usually top line, bottom line focused, some other KPIs, depending on your company's, financial model, and then ends with guidance, right? So you can think about your structure for the CFO section like this. And the CEO section could be, here are 3 reasons why you should invest in us, or here's our 3-4 strategies. Or some companies like to cover things segment-wise. You might be reporting multiple segments. Within each, you could have reasons to believe for each of those segments. Now, everybody will have a unique situation. So I'm not saying this is going to work blindly for everybody. But if you're struggling with the structure of your presentations, this is a good starting point. And then you can evolve it based on your unique situation. So let me share an example. Here's an example of a presentation we did for a client. This was at a conference, and this is the CEO section of the deck. And this company has a very strong, publicly committed, strategy. So this is like their winning formula. It's about brands, their unique capabilities, their people, and ESG, the long-term view. So again, over here, the structure becomes easier, right? This is our winning formula. These are the 4 things. Double click on one. Let's talk about brands. What makes us unique? What gives us the competitive advantage? Same thing with capabilities. How are we differentiated? So on and so forth, right? So that's one way to think about a structure, especially if you're thinking of, overview or conference presentations. Another example could be quarterly earnings. We've seen a lot of quarterly earnings decks, and I would say 8 out of 10 times they can work in this structure. Again, you can think of it like there's a finance portion and then there's a business portion in your earnings slides. A lot of companies are more finance heavy, which is fine. Especially when times are good, numbers can do the talking, right? There are times when we have to do more explaining, and in those situations, right, companies start explaining their business. So to me, I like those presentations which talk about numbers, but they're always trying to explain the business as well, So let me share an example with you, right? This is an example of one of our clients' quarterly presentations. You should always start, like I said, right, with key messages. So if your audience just wants to end at this first slide, that's fine. They still get the key message. So you can start with key messages. Most companies, right, you can then go into by segment financials. So you have by segment financials here. At the same time, you have some commentary as well, right? What were your wins? Any new accounts you won? Any new product you rolled out? Any new cost saving initiative, you completed, right? So it's good to kind of give commentary about, educate folks on how your business works. And then they get into, right, top line, right? How are we doing from a top line performance, cash earnings performance or cash flow here, Again, this is going to depend on your company's key KPIs financially, and then you end with guidance, right? If you are thinking about revamping your earnings deck, right, this is a great way to start, right? Key messages, by segment financials, top line, bottom line, commentary, get into more details of if it's EBITDA, cash flow, whatever makes sense for you, end with guidance. 6 to 8 slides could be sufficient. And this can also work quarter to quarter, right? This structure is such, gives you flexibility and yet works quarter to quarter. So hopefully this helps in terms of creating a structure for your earnings presentation. Take a pause here. Want to get some feedback from you all. Yeah, which of these steps did you find useful? Maybe you can say why you found it helpful, or any other comments, aha moments. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the pyramid version of a general presentation, let's say, you have your 3 arguments. Do you do the summary of the 3 arguments up front and then go through the 3 arguments in succession, or do you do argument 1, evidence for argument 1, argument 2? You follow what I'm saying? In our case, it's like you make an industry argument that has a few points, and then you make, a company argument that makes a few points. So I don't know, but I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. I think, yeah. So I think within each argument, right, you can, within each argument, you can think of it like what, so what, now what, right? So give me an example of an argument or a supporting point. Yeah.
Well, so we're commercial real estate services. So one argument, we would start with long-term commercial real estate has been a good hedge against inflation. So in an inflationary environment, and then we have a slide where we show historical, performance of real estate as an asset class in all kinds of inflation environments. But that's a very, and then that's totally separate from the argument you make about the company itself and its performance. And so I'm struggling with, do I put that slide up front and then go into the company, or do I do the macro arguments first? There's other real estate industry macro arguments you make. Like, do I do, here are the bullet points about real estate macro, and then here are the supporting slides on that, and then here's the arguments for the company, and go into slides for that? Or do I do all the bullet point arguments up front, and then, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, totally understanding what you're saying. Yeah, I think you could do it both ways, but I think it's good to start with the macro, right? External, outside in, right? Mm-hmm. Here's how the real estate has always done, right? You might have data for the last 25 years. And then you are diving into like, how does it matter to you and what does it mean, right? For your company. So another way to think about it is like, what, so what, now what? And yeah, you could have macro for each and then get into like, like real estate is a great hedge. So what it means to you, right? Well, it means we are a fantastic investment, maybe then there's another macro, right? And then you again get into, yeah, that's why we are a great investment for you. So you could do it either ways, where you have all macro together and then you get into your sort of reasons to believe, or you could do one by one, right? Macro, reason to believe, macro, reason to believe. Either way, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes you'll find, right, those are not so mutually exclusive and completely exhaustive, right? So one macro feeds 3 of your strategies, right? Another macro could feed 2 of your strategies. So if that's the case, get all your macro done up front and then get into your strategies, right? Because it's not so much one-on-one correlation, if I made sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else in terms of analysts and story structure? Yeah. Cool. Awesome. No worries. I'll keep going. Let's focus on the next 2 steps here. Thank you for that question. Let's dive into step 3 and 4. Now, these are the steps which are a little bit more fun. We'll share some real slide examples as well. And this is where you are building out the deck. You're done with the story thinking. Now you are cranking out slides. And what are some of the things you can do so that your audience is quickly able to understand your slide, able to digest it, and then also engaging with your content. Okay, let's get in here. How can we help build clear slides? We have these 4 key principles for you. Again, so with step 3, right, our main reasoning is how can you make slides so that each slide lands the plane for you, conveys the point that you want to convey. Okay. Number 1, avoid more than one main message per slide. A lot of times there's temptation to have fewer slides and pack too much in a slide. It makes it hard for your audience to understand. If you're presenting, if you have 2 or 3 messages on a slide, if you're presenting, it's the same amount of time as it will be if you have three different slides, right, to cover each of these messages. So try to keep it to one main message per slide so your audience understands what you're trying to say. Let me share an example of it. Here's an example of a slide from an ESG presentation where this company is talking about their internal sort of decision-making governance model for ESG on the top left. Then they're talking about the 3 key pillars, of their strategy. So this is a big kind of message they want to convey on this slide. This is a big one they want to convey as well. Why pack so much in a slide, right? Make it busy, make it hard for your audience to understand. So instead, it could be as simple as breaking it into multiple slides. Keep it one message per slide. Here we're talking about, how we make decisions around strategy and implementation for ESG. And then we get into, here are our 3 key strategies, right? So avoid having more than one message per slide. Again, the goal is to make it easy for your audience. The next one will sound very rudimentary, very basic, but again, it's something that, is a miss sometimes, is headlines should convey the main message. So a lot of times I see the headline space is not used to convey the main message. Whatever you want to convey on that slide, the headline should convey that. So let me share an example. Here's an example from a quarterly earnings presentation. This is the first slide. And the headline here just says key messages. And then let's say I'm a reader, right? I'm reading this. I'm trying to understand a few things. I'm reading this. I'm understanding a few things. Finally, I come at the bottom and then I'm like, oh, this is the main message. Strong momentum entering 2022, right? Could this not be the main message of the slide itself, right? Why make the audience wait? Instead, tell them what you really want to convey on this slide in the headline itself. So when we redid this entire deck and we were like, headline should have the main message. If I only read the headline of each slide, I get the story. So it's the same thing as outlining in a way. You read the headlines, and then, oh, there's a story. I know what you're trying to say. So the suggestion here is do not waste headlines for topics like EBITDA, or cash flow model. No, say what you want to say. We had strong EBITDA, or our cash flow was in line with our guidance. Say what you exactly want to say. Say it in the headline itself. Another basic one is headline should, the slide's content should support the headline. Again, this will sound really basic, but a lot of times the slide is saying something else and the content at the bottom isn't speaking to the headline. So that's a miss. That's where your audience gets confused. A lot of times you'll notice, right? We want to say something Like you can say something on a slide, but the slide's content is different, right? When you notice that, you know that you really haven't created a slide that's speaking to your main points, right? So in this case, healthy cash flow enables strong investment and shareholder returns. How do I show that, right? Healthy cash flow. Over 3 years, I've made so much money. Where am I putting that money? Back into the business and then return to the shareholders. This might sound really simple, but I do see a lot of slides where either there's more than one message or the headline and the content, they are not tied. And the final principle for building clear slides, especially when it comes to IR presentations, right? You guys have a lot of data and charts. Try to simplify complexity, especially when it comes to data slides. I have a lot of examples where we can show you, right, how to simplify like complex TAM slides, you know, heavy financial slides. If you want to send something over to me after this too, I'm happy to take a look and share my ideas as well. But yeah, try to simplify complexity, especially when it comes to data slides. I'm just going to share an example here. One example. This was again in an ESG presentation where this company has commitments across 3 different areas. And in each of these 3 areas, they want to get to 100% of a metric, you know, and then there's some words here to kind of give commentary around each as well. So each one of these is 100%, right? I want to talk about where I am today, not so much the 100% commitment, right? So is there a better way to communicate data, right? So here's the approach we took, where we were like, yep, I want to talk about where we are today, not so much about, right, 100% is the ideal, everybody gets it. So this is where we are today. We showed with the donor chart in each of these cases. And then we are showing visually as well versus a lot of text. We are showing visually. We went back to the ESG report and found some key pointers to communicate, right? Here's the progress we have made. Let us share some numbers to prove our progress. Again, using visuals and text together to make it easy for the audience to understand. Simplifying complexity from some of this very text-heavy, you know, presentation of information. So yeah, those were the 4 things when it comes to building clearer slides. Let's dive into enhancing slides visually. I know some of you talked about visuals a lot. Let's dive in here. Here are the 4 key principles when it comes to enhancing the visual design of your presentation. Again, the idea here is your audience, you know, you want to earn the attention of your audience. Your audience may sometimes be bored as well, right? Your presentation could be in a sea of sameness, right? With your peers, your competitors. How can you stand out? And then how can you visually communicate your points? At the end of the day, right, we are all visual learners. Picture is worth 1,000 words. How can you visually convey your message? So couple key principles here. Again, this will sound very basic, but we'll show you some examples as well. Use pictures or graphics to make it easy for your audience. This can be done in investor presentations too. Some of you might be like, I can't do it. We'll share some examples. But yeah, wherever you can lean on pictures, graphics, images, please do that. My favorite inspiration is The Economist, right? The cover page of Economist every month is fantastic. Our marketing team posts a lot of content on social media, right? Super inspired by Economist. How can you be visual in your messaging? So here's an example of a cover. How high will interest rates go? Shown in a very bold way, right? But makes the point, right? They could go as high and, you know, screw everything up on this cover, for example. Beautiful examples, a lot of great inspiration, right? When the ride ends, roller coaster, right? This was without a headline, right when the war started. Beautifully showed, saving the Supreme Court. So all of these are, yeah, highly Photoshopped. Some of you might be like, where can I find images? But I think we have some examples that you can apply in your world as well. So here's an example. Here's a company talking about their M&A approach in an investor day presentation. Basically, they are saying, we look at the market, then we look at the target companies itself, right? Then we look at how do those target companies add value, right? To find the right fit when it comes to acquiring companies. Saying something there, and then saying something here too. There's a 2x2. Not very clear. Is there a way to make it visual? So here's the approach we took. We basically thought, right, you're thinking in terms of funnels here, right? So let's say you have an M&A department, right? It's always going to look at the markets. Like you could be competing in 2 or 3 sectors, right? So you're looking at what's an attractive market. And essentially, these are all your potential targets. Target 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, could be dozens, right? Then you're looking at, right, of those targets who have great fundamentals, then you're going down further, right? Within those targets, how do we have synergies with those targets? And you apply the 2x2 to find, which is a higher value add target for you. So that's why we bring the 2x2 here. And then we show the last puzzle piece, right? Like, oh, finally, I found a target with the right fit with my company, right? So you could show it like this, right? Very maybe difficult, not visual, but when you show it with the funnel, right, it's pretty easy what you're trying to achieve, right? So one example of how you can use visuals. Another example is, they're talking about integration focus, which is part of their M&A strategy. A lot of us have this habit of, showing things in 3 columns, and that's fine, but it can get boring, right? It's not as visual, as easy to understand. So if you're talking about integration, right, can you convey with the visual what you mean by integration? It's generally like showing, right, like handshake or partnership, right? So immediately the audience is like, oh, you're talking about integration. And then within each, we took the approach of, using icons, using simple visuals to convey the message, right? What's the integration strategy? And again, this is less text than the before version. The idea is you can speak to those things live in a presentation. If you have visuals, you can speak to it. Your audience pays attention to you versus a lot of words on the slide. So yeah, use visuals when you can. Another principle is hierarchy, which is basically on any given slide, right? If you look at the example on the left, right, you will first, this is a visual, you will first read this. On this visual, you'll read this next, and then this, and then maybe you will read this at the end, right? This is called visual hierarchy. Basically, by varying text sizes, by incorporating pictures, you can force your audience to pay attention to certain things and not pay attention to certain things. So try to understand the visual hierarchy on your slide and accordingly design it so that, right, the right things are getting emphasized or focused. So here's an example. Here's an overview slide where the company wants to talk about all these things about them. Granted, this wasn't a design slide. This was more like raw content. But everything is equal here, right? Everything has the same font size. You don't know where I should pay attention here, right? So if we were to apply visual hierarchy principles, right, then you would vary colors with text size, so that the first thing you pay attention to is here, right? So typically your eyes they follow the Z fashion. They're always looking at top left, they go right, then they go bottom left, then they go bottom right, right? So can you arrange this slide in a way, and can you vary some of the things using colors, fonts, so that people are first paying attention here, then they pay attention here, and finally here. Yeah, so that's a pretty cool principle. Another one is you might still run into situations where your slide is busy. Some of you mentioned, right? Like my CEO or leadership is hard to convince, right? And maybe they like a lot of words, right? So there could be situations where you're not able to get by with fewer words. In those situations, right, use builds, use animation to convey your slide. So this is for example, this CEO wants to talk about these 3 capabilities, 1, 2, and 3, and you flash this slide and it has all this content, right? Immediately what happens with the audience, they start reading these things, 1, 2, 3. They're not listening to you anymore. They are just starting to read the slide. So in order to avoid that, right, use builds, especially, right, if you think of Investor Day, live events, right, live conferences, you can use a lot of builds. And it works very well with AV technology today, right? Even people who are running the show are familiar with it. So you start with high level. These are my 3 capability areas. Let me talk about 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Let me talk about 2, ABC. Let me talk about 3, ABC. So the audience is following you, looking at you, understanding what you're trying to say versus reading slides on their own. You want to avoid that. Yeah. And then finally, a lot of these suggestions we gave you, right, will still fall flat, right, unless you have a modern template, a modern presentation template. Some of you mentioned, right, like, could I refresh my template every year or something? You do need a template. It's foundational to everything you do. So this is, again, good story, good content. That's your stake. You want to present it to impress your audience. So you need the sizzle, and that sizzle can be offered by a strong, modern template. A lot of companies I've seen are still like, in 4:3 templates. Definitely use the widescreen, definitely modernize the look. So this is an example of something we did, 4:3, good brand guidelines this company had. We just made it, we just took it to the next level using icons and making it very easy to edit as well. So not only you benefit visually, but also very easy to maintain going forward as well. So clean slides, clean charts, everything is templatized. So the next deck is easy. Same thing here. This was done like 15 years ago. The template on the left hadn't been updated. We were like, okay, how can we project you as a modern company? So that's all I had in terms of content to share. I know we are at the 2 o'clock mark, so I'll skip this question for you and I'll move to next steps here. This is sort of a cheat sheet we have developed that actually speaks to those 4 steps. We will copy paste this in the chat right now. My team will also send this to you via email after this as well. So do take a look at it. Whenever you're building presentations, you can download this. You can keep it as a ready reference. Either before a presentation or after the presentation, you can kind of use this as a checklist to ask the question, right? Are you meeting some basic guidelines so that your presentations are more effective, more impactful? So yeah, hopefully we shared some ideas here. We shared some of our own learnings here that benefit you. Some of you had a lot of questions in the beginning. Hopefully we shed some light and we gave you some answers here, at least to get started, right? Might not be comprehensive answers, but enough to get started. And like I mentioned at the beginning, if you guys want us to take a look at your presentation, no questions asked, there is no sales pitch to be made. We are just happy to take a look at your presentation, give you some very actionable feedback on how to improve. You can make those improvements working with your design team or on your own. Totally cool with that. Yeah, you can get these external set of eyes. You can get ready for rest of 2022 or upcoming, big events you may be attending. So we'll share a link here to my Calendly, to my scheduling calendar. You can click on it. You will find some time slots. If you want to book time with me, happy to speak with you. Happy to also speak with you via email or LinkedIn as well. So thank you all. I know we are over the 2 o'clock mark, but yeah, I am around. If anybody has any questions, happy to take questions, happy to give my 2 cents.